it's not a question of really ignoring the union, but I think what you've got to do with labor unions is not let them basically call the shots. I mean, you can't make them the center of information, obviously, right? You've got to, any papers which go out should go out to all employees, any circulars or information, not just to the labor union. Essentially, if labor unions, if you never answer their demands, you negotiate, you come in with a certain posture, but essentially you don't meet their demands or what they're asking for. Everyone will perceive that they really don't have much power. So I've always believed that basically it's management that gives unions power, okay? Now even with airlines and with shipping lines here, we've made tremendous progress. Even when the airplane doesn't fly, millions of dollars are lost. But that I can understand, a union has power if it makes trouble for you. But even there, you know, with an airline, I mean, we staged successful lockouts and even changed the catering service. And remember, in Japan, you know, it's a country of partial strike. You know, in America and in other countries, the ultimate economic weapon is the strike. It's taking away your working services, okay? Partial strikes in America are considered to be basically sabotage. They're not acceptable. But here, I guess because enterprise unions had limited strike funds, the money was basically just coming from one company, or certainly upper body unions don't have much money because most of the dues go to the enterprise union, but they don't have money to sustain a long-term economic strike. So what they do is create problems for you in the workplace. They try and embarrass you. But then it's your call at that point. You can just go ahead, you have to go ahead and make your own assessment. You have to say, based on these attitudes or this lack of work, we feel that your productivity has gone down by this percentage. You just cut back their pay. Just don't pay, you know, cut back the pay at that point. Then you have to start playing hardball. Sure. If you have a union, the employee representative basically has to, the majority representative who signs that ikensho, especially if it's a majority union, that has to be the labor union. Or each and every labor union has a right to write up an ikensho, okay? Or if you don't have a labor union, a majority representative of your employees, it's called. In reality, it's usually somebody in the General Affairs Department or the Personnel Department who will basically go around and talk to the employees, show the document, and write up the ikensho. And I would suggest that it be somebody who's rank and file-ish in nature. He appears, you know, rather young and so on, but somebody who really support management and, you know, management's position, and you know, write the thing up and submit it. And I don't think you have to make too big a deal out of that, actually, when you write up your rules of employment. See, one of the things, you know, Peter, also on rules of employment is if you open it up to the employees and you ask them, what are your ideas? What do you feel about this? And they give you their ideas. They spent energy and time on it. And then you just throw it all out the window. Nobody likes that. You can't do that. The employer really has to write those things up. You know, you're in charge. After all, who pays the salaries, right? The union doesn't pay the salaries. There's never been a union anywhere in the world that can pay salaries. And when a union gets really heisty and says the company wasn't managed properly or whatever, that's why, you know, we have to have a staff reduction, we have to cut back salaries. Say, fine, maybe we didn't do the best job. Can you do any better? You want to take over from next week? I'll do your job, you do mine. See what he says. It's easy to say that. So, you know, unions, I really don't see how, especially in a non-airline, a non-shipping company, anything but airline or shipping, but even there, you should see what we did 3 weeks ago with a certain shipping company here who had to declare Chapter 11 in the States. Incredible. We had a bout with them 4 years ago, but, you know, recommendations never got passed. I mean, that happens. Nothing really went through, the things that I recommended. This time around, though, everything's in collective bargaining agreements. They had in collective bargaining agreements that there would be a 60% premium paid on involuntary retirement. In other words, it was already hooked in there. There's no reason to do that. They already had a very rich involuntary retirement, you know, lump sum retirement benefit. And they said that On top of that, automatically 60% will be paid. Well, there's no money to pay. They never funded the pension. So what we have now is they've given up that 60% concept. They're allowing the employer to cut back the lump sum retirement benefit by 40%. 40 guys, 40 union members have agreed to leave on that basis. We've increased the working day by 1 hour, from 7 hours to 8 hours, cut back long-term disability. We have complete freedom now on, moving Teamsters, everybody, who handles cargo, having them do different jobs. And so I think, employees have to realize that when the situation is really tough and rough, that's the way it will go. It will always go that way. And so before that, as responsible managers, you have to have basically a good, fair shop, but one where good employees are rewarded very well and where ones that aren't working as well are cut back. And in general, I think you want to have, basically emphasis on cash compensation, because that's something that if you're set up right can reward the truly good performer. And we'll go less to the other, but some of these other benefits, such as social insurance contributions or lump sum retirement benefits, these are paid out to all employees uniformly, and it's an extra cost that's non-performance related. So I think you want to watch out for that. But let me just give you a perspective on this. The largest firms in Japan aren't funded. The largest firms aren't funded because they couldn't come up with the premiums. They didn't have the money to do it. So many of the largest firms they're not at all fully funded, or they're only funded partially, or they just started funding. They weren't able to do it. They just couldn't even consider doing it. They didn't have the money to do it, or they wouldn't do it, huh? Maybe they were smart, because just like that shipping company, the employees they're really on the run now. They were hard cookies all the way through. They were hard to deal with, but now when it gets to this point, there's not a thing that they can do. And it's a shame, really. It'd be much better if management was strong enough, smart enough, tough enough to have the thing set up from the beginning so that the money wasn't bleeding out like that over all those years. Reader's Digest was the same thing. Everyone read about that in the newspapers, and that's a company where from the second year of service, it was 2 months all the way through. From the second year of service, it was 2 months for each year of service, so it got up to 82, 84 months. 7 months bonus. Everybody, let's not say readers, let's just say there are companies here where essentially, men, women, it's supposed to be that way now, especially with women, but in other words, even clerks, everybody is paid exactly the same salary based on age. Not in Japanese companies. No Japanese company is set up that way, but some of the foreign companies got into that. One of the key factors in Japan is this dual economy. I mean, all the academics see it that way. In other words, you have the large firms, they have the subcontractors. The other aspect of it is within the large firms, you have contract employees who aren't paid bonus, for example, aren't paid the lump sum retirement benefit, for example, right? They can be dismissed, especially if you're smart and you let them play for about 1 week in between contract renewal. See, what happened with the oil crisis is for the first time, some of the temporaries said, wait, no, I worked here 11 years, nobody had me sign a contract renewal at all. When I started, you told me I was a temporary employee on a 1-year basis, but where are the papers? Or there was a paper, but there was no contract renewal. So they went to court, and the judges, trying to protect them, basically went along with it. But essentially, you're still in good shape if you put somebody on a term contract. The longest legal employment contract in Japan is 1 year, huh? That's not like in the United States. I think America's 5 or 3. Other countries have other situations, but Japan, unless you're bringing a value to a job other than yourself, unless you're bringing equipment or other people or customers, but then it's a commercial contract, basically. Unless you're doing that, the longest legal employment contract is 1 year. You can do anything else at all. You can have day workers, right? 1 week, 2 week, 1 month, 6 months, any kind of a term that you want. Okay? Then you have the other notion of taking people from, say, Manpower Japan and so on, right? Taking those kind of temporaries, but they're not your employees at all. So that's the good news about that. First of all, the notion that incentives aren't used and don't work in Japan isn't necessarily true. It depends on the type of company and on the structure. For example, the typical real estate agency here, for example, might pay 3 different base salaries to employees, maybe as low as 60,000 yen, 100,000 yen, 150,000 yen, with 3 different commission systems. One of my friends, Kato-chan, he's told me all about this. He's worked, by the way. He's one of the first Japanese I ever met here 14 years ago. He's worked in 4 different real estate agents. He's been a ramenya. He's been a taxi driver, okay? But he tells me that Japan is a land of lifetime employment, right? That's what Japan is all about. You've sensed that, right? But anyway, Kato-san tells me his program at his real estate agency. So 3 different salaries with 3 different commissions. Obviously, the lower the base salary, the higher the commission is going to be, okay? The good guys, the successful ones, inevitably, if they don't start, they move down to the lower base salary, right? But in that kind of a commission system, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to decide maybe within 6 months which base salary you're going to go for and then which commission, and you can't keep changing it, or you can only change maybe once a year or once every 2 years. Okay. Obviously, that's a somewhat maybe unique organization. Real estate agents are a unique industry, but there are lots of others that are doing it. Small Japanese companies, do it. It is done. Larger Japanese companies maybe don't have a sales commission tied in per se. I mean, obviously they generally tend not to have it, although surprisingly some do. But they are nonetheless paying by performance, in that salaries do vary, contrary to popular belief, to lesser extents than they might in the West. And also bonuses will vary, promotions will vary, okay? Now, foreign companies with commissions, for example, there's one client where they feel that their base salaries are higher than they should be, and their sales have to expand more in the high-tech area here. So we're coming in with a concept of, okay, we're not going to cut back those base salaries, but what we're going to do is say that if you don't make certain targets, it will be cut back. I mean, we're not going to cut them back from the start, but it's kind of a negative commission concept. You can keep that base as long as you make this level, but when you don't make that level, we're going to start to cut back that salary, okay? Now, we've implemented that, and it's quite successful. And it's interesting because it really touches the pocketbook. The other commission system, if I work hard, I get something extra, but this one now, they're in a position where they're going to lose. They're actually even going to lose something, and sales are picking up, okay? Another company, and I think this is a real success, or I mean, it's a proud story. I don't think there's a reason not to give a company name. Well, the other one will be successful too, but for example, a company like Cray Computer, I mean, this was just something we worked out with Jim Otis. I mean, it was quite simple, but they sell computers at, say, $12 million a shot, right? In the States, all salesmen get a 0.5% commission. They get a 0.5% on that sales price, on the sales ticket. In Japan, the salesman started saying, in Japan we don't pay commissions, right? So guys start out on higher base salaries, like basically 5.5 to 7.5 million yen, okay, which is higher paid even at a 360 exchange rate than the bases that salesmen get back at the head office. But then when they sold the first computers to NTT, suddenly, commissions aren't such a bad idea, right? They want to get the commissions too, obviously. So what we just did was work out a nice little program where it was a group-based kind of an incentive. What we did was, first of all, half of that 0.5% went to all the employees. The other half went into a fund, which basically the president also had control on, for training programs or for company trips, something like that, where he had discretion. And the person closest to the point of sale would, say, get something like a figure of 4 or 3 or 2 or 1. In other words, the salesman who was most responsible would get a weighted average of, say, 4. The next salesman might get, say, 3. And then maybe sales, service, support, sales engineers would get, say, 2, and then the general office would get 1, something like that, okay? Now, that's not exactly what was done at Cray, but, I mean, that was the kind of concept. This was a few years back. That's sort of an idea. And it was a satisfying way to handle the whole thing. I think that, you know, everyone was basically pleased, okay? So it wasn't just giving it to the salesman, which really doesn't seem to be quite fair, does it? Because that salesman will have no credibility with the client unless that client knows that the company has, you know, tremendous, you know, ability to apply operating systems, right, software to tune the computer up and fix it and everything else. So really the sales commission shouldn't just go to the salesman in that sense, unless his salary is really low, I guess, which would be the case in the States. Okay? So we are working with incentives and with commission systems. I believe that that they can work, and they do work here. And let's go back on that question too and say, if they're not done at the large Japanese employers, you know, why is that? How can they get away and be successful without doing it? And maybe one reason for that is the closed labor market notion. We don't have to say lifetime employment as we started out. What we really should say is, anyway, why do you have lifetime employment in the large firms? It's because the closed labor market concept, right? There are lack of options outside, the inability to get another good job outside. Okay, so that's why you basically stay there. Now, in that company. So maybe if a man believes that his future is with that given large Japanese employer, he'll work very hard all the way through because he'd like to get on the board of directors or he'd like to become a bucho and so on. It's a closed labor market. In other words, the idea of this is my only chance to really be successful in this company. And when you become a director, you get significantly better, you know, better conditions, obviously, or even a bucho as opposed to someone who doesn't even make kanrishoku or a manager. But in the foreign firm, perhaps, where there's an open labor market, okay, as opposed to a closed labor market, where you can go out and get an equally good job in another foreign firm, or maybe a better job. Maybe you don't have to work that hard. There's what? You can be saved later on in your career. You can get a job in another small firm, maybe with higher pay. You can talk your way into it, or maybe, you know, a headhunter will put you in there, or you'll answer a newspaper ad. And you're not necessarily giving as much up. Maybe you're giving nothing up. Maybe you're doing better because you didn't have such good benefits. Your company didn't have a name value in Japan or social prestige to begin with, right? So maybe while the Japanese large employers can have, you know, if you watch these guys, they come in and fix the Xerox machine, you know, the Ricoh people or Fuji Xerox, the guys are great. They're like soldiers, you know, they're just well-mannered, you know, oh, they do everything right. You know, they're really well-trained, obviously, well-disciplined. They believe in their companies. Everything is structured. But if it's not going to work that way in a foreign firm, because you as the expatriate manager, you know, you don't know all that, you don't know how to elicit that kind of a response from your employee, right? You're not capable of doing it. You can't even touch his mind and his heart when you can't speak his language, right? And even if you can, you're still not going to be able to do it nearly as well as a Japanese. When you can't do all that, maybe you've got to do something very different, okay? And then I think, you know, that the money is a significant factor. And to say that it's not doesn't make any sense at all. Just like in a small Japanese employer, yeah, they'll work harder maybe. Maybe the Japanese president in a small operation will have, you know, more control on the guy. He won't be able to get away with as much. He won't be able to pull any fast ones. He doesn't have the excuse of saying, well, you know, they don't understand me, or the head office makes decisions, we don't get to do things our way. Or, you know, I think it's easier in that sense for a Japanese to work in a foreign firm. Maybe there's less discipline, there's more room for excuse and so on. But still, I think you probably have to do something significantly different in a foreign firm or in a small Japanese firm than you would have to do in one of those major employers. But things will start to change maybe at the major employers too. Just like Nomura Shoken and so on, so that they don't lose their top-notch producers, their salesmen, and you know, their traders and so on. They're starting to pay them significant discretionary bonuses to keep them, okay? Now, you know, they tried to hold the line and say, no, we're not going to do that. Even Citibank did that, right? For their gaijin, you know, Citibank used to be like an IBM. You know, they'd let them leave, they'd let them go out into industry, the bankers, and they could afford it. But not in today's, you know, in investment in the financial worlds of today. They finally broke down and they said, yeah, you know, we've told, what was it, 300-400 of our managers worldwide on the investment banking side that they're going to get big bonuses. You know, more like the British did it. But again, you know, it's a long answer to that question, but let's move into one other concept, and that is what you should begin to think about, I think, is what I'm starting to call a discretionary income concept. And to some extent, it comes from our work, you know, in recruiting with securities companies here, where they look at what a guy made, say a trader. They look at what he